Welcome everybody to Sustainable River Basin Management Module 2, Part 2. What we want to discuss today is water as a resource. We want to talk about river basin concepts. First of all, what is so special about water? We know that water is, or you should know that water is a single resource. That means there is no substitute, and all of the living things on Earth depend on this water. And it is a limited resource, it is a scarce resource. It has a social, economic and environmental value. So that means that water impacts all aspects of life on the planet, and anybody, scientists or not, politician or not, will get involved when it comes to water and water availability. So poor water management or water shortages will lead to diseases, it will lead to malnutrition, to reduced economic growth, to social instability, it will lead to conflict and environmental disasters. And that's why we have to deal with this in courses like the Sustainable River Basin Management. Let's reflect upon water utilization, and we can differentiate water utilization into two categories. First being consumptive use. What we mean by consumptive use is that water that has been used will not be available anymore for other users. That consumptive use could be evaporation, it could be contamination, it could be plant transpiration, it could be human consumption. Where such consumptive use occurs is with domestic water use, with irrigation in agriculture, with the production of goods, with mining, dilution. Dilution leads to contamination, with cooling, and with the removal of our waste, our sanitation, water-based sanitation systems. And the second category is the non-consumptive use, which means either an in situ use of water, it could be the withdrawal of water, the storage of water, and the return flow of water. And such utilizations would be in hydropower generation, in transportation, and in cultural, religious or recreational uses. Now, what is important to keep in mind when we come to water management is that water has been turned into a goal of national economic development. That means water is considered as an asset, and asset comes from the financial world. It has become an economic good. What we also have to keep in mind is that river systems were changed over as long as humans are on Earth, and they were changed to serve our human needs. And we also have to agree upon the fact that we have achieved many beneficiaries by changing, adjusting our river systems to our needs. Let's just think of the waterborne sanitation systems, our irrigation systems, our pipelines that take water to where we need it instead of forcing people to settle close to the water sources. Let's think of the green revolution that was made possible by the possibility to access groundwater through boreholes and the construction of dams for various purposes. Now, let's set this aside, but keep it in mind, and let's start from the basics. We first of all have to define river basin, the term river basin, and I'm showing here an example of a river basin. This is from India, as you can see on the map here, the Krishna Basin. So what a river basin is essentially is the part of the land surface where one drop of water would drain through tributaries, small rivers into major streams, and eventually reach an ocean, like in this example. Now, we also often hear the term river catchment, and what we mean by river catchment is essentially the same as with river basin. We can use those terms exchangeable. And then there's a third term that often appears, which is watershed, and watershed is not the same as river basin. Watershed is a subdivision of a catchment or a river basin, which means, looking into our example here, those colored sub-areas would correspond to watersheds or sub-catchments of the catchment area of the Krishna Basin. And we can study all those individually, or we can look into this at a river basin scale, depending on our needs and purposes. So what we can summarize is that our watersheds are the spatial or basic spatial representation of the terrestrial phase of our hydrological cycle. So we are not looking at what happens in oceans or oceans alone if we talk about river basin management. Now, river basin appear in very different sizes, from very small, from a few square kilometers to many hundreds of thousands of square kilometers. And India has several examples of these very large river catchments in the north, for example, or very fairly small or comparably small river catchments to the west, southwest. The physical, chemical and biological characteristics of these river systems are determined by the nature of the catchment and the activities that take place in such catchments. Means the nature, the physical conditions of the area, the climatic conditions, and activities means any of the human or biological activities that take place. And all of this we can summarize under the science of the stream morphology. We will come back to stream morphology when we talk about river restoration at a later point again. Now, the nature and the activities in river basins determine and are also influenced by a loop process. The process of runoff generation from rainfall, how much of runoff is generated. It influences and also determines process of runoff concentration, and it determines how this runoff is being channeled to streams and how streams after all work and function. Just 2 examples here. The basin shape. We have two different types of basin shapes. One with many tributaries and one with very few. And here runoff discharge rating curve. What you can see is that we get a very flat discharge over time in a small or less dense river system compared to a fairly large discharge and a very steep, comparably steep discharge curve over time for a more dense river basin system. This can be used for analysis, for predictions, for forecasts and modeling. And let's look at the second example, the basin relief, the elevation that we observe in one river basin. Example here, water moving from A to B, and A to B our relief, and the associated generic discharge curve to it. What you can see is that in a very steep river catchment, we have a very concentrated, very steep discharge taking place at a very comparably rapid response, rapid occurrence, and in a more in a flat or flatter terrain we observe a discharge that is more slow onsetting and more evenly distributed and not developing such a peak like in a steeper terrain. And again, this can be used for predictions and also for flood monitoring or flood prevention measures as an example. Now let's look into the catchment concept and from a hydrological, social and economic perspective. Remember how we looked into the different concepts, models when we talked about the water cycle. We only looked at the hydrological part and not the social and economic. Now let's take a catchment as a system, and the green will show us, is showing us our system. This box is our system and it corresponds to a catchment, and we have as an outside energy source our sun. And then we have as one inputting component our precipitation. We have as an outgoing component our runoff from our catchment, which could be runoff into the ocean. And we have as a second output component evaporation or evapotranspiration taking place from our system. Now the first that will happen you can expect is interception, and those are different storages that I am describing here. So interception means that when rainfall occurs or when some precipitation occurs, that it will be intercepted before it reaches the ground. It will be deposited, stored temporary or long-term above the ground, and it will evaporate eventually or continue or move back and become runoff. We could also have in the type of precipitation, rainfall or snow, if you have which would form a snowpack as a temporary storage again, which then will, and as snow is melting, join another temporary storage compartment, which we call surface detention. Those detention areas can be in the size of millimeters, square millimeters, square centimeters, or even larger in as large depressions. All of them are very important surface detention areas where water has been stored intermittent. And then we eventually generate surface runoff and infiltration, and this surface runoff will join our overall runoff eventually from our catchment, whereas surface infiltration will move our water particles into another storage compartment, forming soil moisture. And part of that again will evaporate. Now, from our soil moisture, parts of the water will join yet another storage compartment, which is vegetation. And again, transpiration and evapotranspiration will take place from here. And some of this water from our soil moisture, from our unsaturated zone, will reach the groundwater, the saturated zone, and remain in our groundwater storage for a longer period, and again eventually join our runoff out of our system, our catchment. The major part of it will move into the storage compartment of rivers and lakes and become runoff out of our catchment or evaporate. So this can be analyzed individually in much more detail depending on our needs and our objectives. Now let's look into the hydrological systems or ways of describing it. And what you have seen or sensed already from the previous slide was that we describe our hydrological systems through combining storages and the fluxes taking place between those storages. What happens, what is the size of our storage, how long does it remain in our storage, and how, under which physical conditions water particles are removed from that storage into another storage. So we can visualize this in an example like this one, where we have our input over time measured, our input rate, and we can express or monitor, measure our output rate, output over time, and in between something is happening because both of the graphs are differ from each other, and this is what has been what the transformation is taking place in our storages. So the transformation function of this would probably look like this. Now let's simplify this in the following scheme, where we depart from our physical laws, and we depart from our system properties, our physiographical factors, our basin shape, our basin relief, for instance, climate factors, the vegetation, soil conditions, soil types. All of those are physiographical factors. And those we use to define our model structure, and also those define our model parameters. We may have a few parameters, we may have very many parameters, and if we are able to get those details. And all of this has to serve a purpose, and we want to generate an output information over time. It could be a hydrological data, it could be more often and more important a decision support, or it could be an input to other models. And such an input, for instance, when we just look into hydrological models but want to do sustainability analysis, this has to be what comes from a hydrological model be combined as an input to other models which can incorporate social and economic aspects of water use and water utilization. Usually we start in hydrological models with our input component as in the form of climate or hydrological data, which have to be measured, and those are connected through a system operation, and we call this an input-output relationship model that relates, for instance, rainfall to a specific runoff. Now, let's just simplify the hydrological model theory a little bit more. What we do is that we reduce the system input to a cause, and the cause would be, for instance, precipitation. And we reduce our system output to the effect, and the effect would be a runoff. And then we link those two through a system operator or a transformation function. And that would create our rainfall runoff relationship of a specific area of interest, the catchment area, for instance. Now, there are limitations to it, challenges, but real limitations to it. It's obviously a simplification, which depends. We cannot change our physical laws, but may not have all our physiographical parameters at hand, so we have to simplify. We want to simplify, that's why it's a model. But also challenging are the scale dependency of our input and output variables. Remember our last class on this issue, and our incomplete understanding, or otherwise the complexity of our systems. And obviously when we take this as a system, we are not able to incorporate any other outside effects or the system components such as the feedback loops caused by our way of using our water resources or how we shape our river basins as humans or as biological factors influence and shape our river basins. So those are some of the challenges or limitations of such hydrological models. I want to stop here and we continue next time on water budgets.